A lot of Leeds and Leicester fans have been asking me recently with regards to Scott Parker, who is being earmarked to take over at one of those two clubs. It's understood, TalkSport put out the other day that Scott Parker has been in talks with Leeds. Of course, they've recently been taken over by the 49ers group. And of course, Leicester City has been long also linked to Scott. So, what I really want to do in this show is give my honest opinion of what Scott has brought to the team at here at Bournemouth when he was manager and what to really look out for. So, firstly, let's look at the positive sides. Of course, Fulham fans will be able to say this as well, but Scott Parker has managed to get two promotions from the Championship to the Premier League. Of course, with Fulham, that come through the playoffs in an empty Wembley Stadium against Brentford, but with ourselves, we did finish second. Scott Parker has got a decent track record as well in picking some players up. So, of course, he's done that with both Fulham and ourselves as well. The likes of Shriki Dembele, he brought him into the side. Also, there's other players throughout his spell here that he bought in. Gary Cahill, of course, Ryan Fredericks was a player that he bought in, who he'd previously played with. But the big question that I've been getting is should Leeds or Leicester City go for Scott Parker? And my honest opinion is I don't personally think that he would be the right man in the long run. He might get both sides out of the championship. I think at this moment in time, as it's sat, I think Leeds are probably better suited because there's going to have to be quite a lot of changes at Leicester with regards to their personnel. Jamie Vardy, of course, has come pretty much to the end of his time there. He is of course, the wrong side of 30 now by quite some considerable distance. And unfortunately, players do start to slow down at his sort of age. But I think, Scott Parker, has got more than capable. He's more than capable of getting both of these sides out of the championship. But it's what he does when he gets to the Premier League. But also, how he actually got Bournemouth to the Premier League, and that's why I'm doing this video. This is why I'm giving my opinion. I can't speak so much about his time at Fulham. I haven't really studied it as in great deal of detail, but do remember he did drop Mitrovic, that same Mitrovic that then went on and scored 40 goals across all competitions in the first season under Marco Silva for Fulham, and has also taken Premier League by storm. So he did drop him for the Premier League, which was a bit of a confusing one. Didn't really play to Mitrovic's strengths. So that is one thing. But Scott Parker at Bournemouth. So this is what is weird. So Scott Parker, when he first got here, had a bit of a crisis. And that was a crisis, an injury crisis. There was a number of players out, and therefore he had players like Zeno Ibsen Rossi, Gavin Kilkenny. You also had Jaden Anthony and Jordan Zamora. I know those two have become names, but of course, at that point, they weren't big players for the club. So he had to pretty much combine it all together and play this side that was a little bit disjointed. We went into that first game against West Bromwich Albion, a team, who had just been recently relegated from the Premier League, I should say, and also a very, very tough opponent. And we did well in that first game. And this is the thing: in the first batch of games in the championship, he managed to get from 15 games 37 points, and that is a fantastic return. An absolutely fantastic return at any level, but especially in a league which is so competitive like the Championship. And, to be honest, at that time, I thought, we're going to storm this league. We're going to be absolutely fine. We'll go up as champions, not a problem. And that's what's so weird. He did that week with a weakened side. Um, and then the wheels kind of started to fall off. So there's a couple of games which jump out to me. Peterborough. We didn't beat Peterborough home or away that season. And those were two very boring games. They were two games where we should have really controlled that match, and we didn't. We didn't. Um, the game against Reading at home is another one. Should have probably been out of sight, probably about 5-0 up at half time. Reading were poor, you know, Bournemouth were very, very good. Scott Parker then makes a number of substitutions, and those substitutions then turned that game on its head, and we was lucky to come out of that game with a point. Now that is tactical naivety, in my sense. The game against Derby, we lost 3-2. A Derby side that was looked a bit devoid of confidence at that point got beat by them 3-2. Again, should have put our stamp on it. There's a number of games throughout that season. And of course, towards the end, there was the Swansea game, 3-0 down against Swansea. Facing, to be honest, we were staring the playoffs in the face. Um, and luckily, the move to bring on Kiefer Moore worked a treat. And Kiefer Moore was outstanding in that running. To be honest, he was the player that really, really jumped out to me and, hinted he was the one that was, pushed us over that line. That wasn't Scott's doing. That was Kiefer, coming in and giving us something a little bit different. I did say at the time, I said, I don't think Scott Parker has a plan B or a plan C. And after bringing in Kiefer Moore, I started to think, well, actually, he has got that. Um, but evidently, the next season we found out he didn't. And to be honest, he only had 4 games. Some people might be saying that I was harsh. I know I spoke to Robbie Savage and Chris Sutton on the way back from Liverpool, and they said I was harsh. But the club, of course, agreed with me in the long run. Um, Scott Parker is good at getting the results when it's needed most. So, of course, the Nottingham Forest match, we needed to win that game. We had to win that game. We couldn't put anything to chance. We could have, if we had drawn, it would gone into the next weekend's that game against Millwall. They had Hull. Millwall was no pushovers. Hull probably their season was dead, to be perfectly honest. So, that would been you would have probably favoured Forest to get a better result than Bournemouth, and therefore, it was a gamble. But Scott Parker did come out. His halftime team talk was very, very good. The players seemed united behind him. Which was the weird thing, is But then again, we've got a good group of professionals here at Bournemouth, and that is probably a big thing that Leeds and Leicester fans need to ask themselves. Have they got a good group of professionals? Because if they haven't, then it could be a little bit more difficult. Um, Parker was, at times very, very frustrating. He's a very defensive manager. There was games during that season where he went too defensive, and we didn't need to do that. We could go at teams. We could control the game. We could, really threaten, but we didn't because Scott Parker didn't want to. He went defensive, and that then therefore led into the following season. So before the ball had even been kicked, of course, Scott Parker come out with some silly comments and how he felt that we was under equipped. Maxim Denim did do his best. considering that, there was takeover happening in the background. Maxim managed to bring in Selesi for him. We'd already bought in Neto, we bought in Fredericks during that window as well as Tavernier. So we had spent money. So we had done things. But Scott, you know, pretty much said we was under equipped, which proved to be false in the long run. Yes, I know our January business helped us across the line, but at the end of the day, it was still false in the long run. Um, Personally, I think that Scott, um, during those games against Man City, Arsenal and Liverpool, Man City probably a little bit harsh, but especially against Arsenal and Liverpool, the Arsenal game, of course, we was 2-0 down in the first 10 minutes. That's always going to be an uphill struggle against a team that is so good, and also a team that, at that point, I even flagged them up as somebody who, really could compete for the Premier League title. And so it showed. They didn't do it in the end, but they were there, in that and challenging for the first time in years. But we gave them a head start. And after that, we weren't particularly very good. We did have a little bit of a go at them, but not enough. And Liverpool, well, Liverpool was just embarrassing. As good as Liverpool were on that day, and I'm not taking anything away from them, when you sit too far back and you let a team pass that ball in and around you, in front of you, they can pick you off with ease. That is not the way that you win a football match. Eddie Howe used to attack teams. He used to attack, the likes of Liverpool, Arsenal, and he got positive results at times. Chelsea, he attacked them. He went out and thought, right, okay, we could have got beaten heavily, but at the end of the day, if we did, that would be playing the right way. We would be playing progressive football, our own style, and not this style that the players aren't suited to. Now, this is a big thing for me, is that you've got two clubs there, Leeds and Leicester, and you've got to find a manager at this point in time who does work to both of their qualities. And Scott Parker isn't either of them. You know, Leeds, for example, the Marcelo Bielsa way of playing. You know, there's only one man that I could think of, apart from Bielsa himself, who should, be considered for that job, because Jesse Marsh has gone there, tried to change the way they're playing, hasn't got the players to do that, failed. Javi Gracia's come in, done even worse. And then, of course, Big Sam couldn't really get a tune out of them. They have got a squad which is quite decent. But the problem is they haven't got the manager or the philosophy to actually do that. And I don't think Scott Parker is that man. Um, Leicester's probably a little bit more like Scott Parker style. Brendan Rodgers does play a little bit more defensively, but again, they did have a lot of quality going up front last season. They're not going to have that to rely on. So this is what's weird, is if you have got quality up front, yes, maybe you can play that way because you can pick off a goal. You can play a bit more defensive, keep teams at bay, and then pick a goal, and then get them to come onto you, and then hit them on the counter attack. You know, Bournemouth, we don't score as many goals as, say, for example, those top teams. So what we have to rely on is being on the front foot, being progressive, not being too defensive, and therefore, doing a little bit of a different style. Leicester, because of the quality they had up front, could actually play a little bit more defensive until time ran out. And that was why Brendan Rodgers did eventually struggle and get the sack at Leicester. Dean Smith come in, did, to be fair to him, did go, a little bit more attacking, but like Leeds, it was too late when he come in. Um, so I think. Leicester at this point in time, have got a squad which are a little bit more suited to Scott Parker, but they're not going to at the start of next season. Um, but then again, it is a championship, and Scott Parker seems to have a knack of getting teams out of that. And in fact, looking at what he did with us, if he has a weaker squad, sometimes he gets better results out of those sides. I know that sounds really ridiculous after he come out with what he did against after Liverpool and saying he's under equipped, but he seems to get better results out of weaker sides because those first 15 games, we had to go for it. We had no other choice because we had players out injured. And he had to think, right, okay, to get the points that we need to put ourselves in a position, we've got to try and outscore the other team. We have to try and attack them. We have to try and that's what he did. And I think he did well in that sense. But, when, say, for example, you have got a team, you know, who are full strength, what he would like to rather do is sit back and then try and nick a goal. Now, Solanke is not an out and out goal scorer. He did well last season in the championship, but at the same time, he isn't an out and out goal scorer. He's not somebody who's poacher. He can't be relied on to get loads of goals. Luckily, we had goals coming from the rest of the pitch, which got us over the line. But Scott got us into a position where 37 points from 15 games, that's nothing to be, you know, uh, you know, to take away from him. But, to nearly then stuff it up from that position is kind of unacceptable. Really, it should never have come down to that Forest game. If you want my honest opinion, if Scott Parker had stayed at this football club, and had not been sacked after Liverpool, so there was no Gary O'Neill, would we have gone down? I think we would have finished below Southampton. And that is my honest opinion because of the way he was playing. Now, don't get me wrong, Gary O'Neill has played defensively as well at times and has also been found out at points where, two examples, Spurs at home, Leeds away, where we was 3-1 up. He goes all defensive. Leeds are invited onto us. They pick us off. Bosh, that's it. Um, Spurs, exactly the same, 2-0 up, invite them onto us and picked off. But those are mistakes, and he rectified those mistakes, and he didn't knock the team. He's learned from those, and that's what I said actually in my Gary O'Neill video. He learned from those. Scott Parker didn't. In that championship running, he should have thought, right, okay, this Derby defeat, what do we do? We need to mix it up. We need to go at a team like Peterborough. Oh, we've drawn against Peterborough. Well, okay, next week, I just can't remember the row of games, but I think Peterborough and Reading were quite close to each other. Right? Okay, we've got Reading. They're not very good. Let's go for them. Go for the juggler. And to be honest, failed at that. And then the tactical changes as well. There was nothing about learning in any of that. He wasn't learning. He was going with what he thought, and he wasn't progressing. He was he was making the mistakes, but he wasn't changing it. And some of the football was some of the most dire football that we'd watched here at Dean Court. Okay, we was lucky. We had Eddie Howe, and he used to attack. Jason Tyndall used to attack as well. Um, I think Jonathan Woodgate went a little bit more defensively, which is, but I wouldn't blame Jonathan Woodgate for that because I think, he did the right things at the time. I think he made the right decisions. But Scott Parker was on a whole different level of defensiveness. He was the number one target after Eddie Howe left. I'm not sure why. I think when you look at Fulham and what they did in the Premier League, he it should have done a lot better with them because he had Mitrovic at his disposal, but no, didn't use him, and that was, his big fault at Fulham. Of course, same day we bought him in, and rest is history. Getting us out of the Championship, he did that. You can't take that away from him, but it should have been more comfortable than what it was, considering the start. If he had attacked, or say, for example, after those 15 games, 37 points, you bought in Eddie Howe, we was winning the league. There's no questions about that. We should, if we had continued playing in an attacking sense, we would have won that league in the Championship. Fulham would not have won it. But instead, no, went defensive at times, and basically sacrificed that. Sacrificed that. To be honest, one of the best comebacks that season was against Fulham. When we was 1-0 down, because he had to. He had to have a go. You know, sometimes he didn't get so lucky. We was behind, and he couldn't turn it round because we didn't have enough time, or the players weren't up to it to turn it round at that point. Which I'm not saying. I know one of the things he said was the players weren't up to it, and that we weren't good enough for that level in the Premier League, which is of course is incorrect because we've stayed up. But I think the one thing I would say is that you know at times there is going to be times when a team does change their tactics and stifles you, and some of those teams in the Championship is a tough league. It's a tough league to actually get out of, and you can't take that away from him, but it should have been a lot easier considering our start than it actually was. Could he get Leeds out of the Championship? Yes. Could he get Leicester out of the Championship? Yes. But is he a long-term future for either club? No. And that is my reasoning behind it. I think that, please, Leeds fans, Leicester fans, tell me if you would be happy with Scott Parker, and what you think of him joining your club. I know that Leicester is probably a bit more linked than Leeds has been, but of course that report come out from Talksport, saying that Leeds is definitely in for him. So that is going to be it's going to be interesting whoever he chooses, or if somebody else comes out of the woodwork. My honest opinion about who both sides should get and who would be most fruitful for Leeds, I think there's only one man, and that's Carlos Corberan. Um, he knows the club, worked under Marcelo Bielsa, did a fantastic job at Huddersfield, managed to get them into the playoffs. Let's be honest, they weren't particularly great side, but he managed to get them into the playoffs. Of course, unfortunately, failed in the playoffs, but then he's taken over at West Brom when West Brom were 23rd in the league under Steve Bruce, in all sorts of trouble. He had a director of football who was spending money on rubbish, let's be honest, spending money on not the right players. And he managed to turn them into a decent side and narrowly missed out on the playoffs. So I think he personally is the perfect person because he will be backed by the 49ers group. And I think, he would get Leeds out of the Championship, but also would be able to stabilise Leeds in the Premier League. With regards to Leicester, my honest opinion is sticking by the man who did start to turn it round last season, Dean Smith. And he's shown that he's a decent manager. He's liked by the players that are there, um, and it would make sense to give him a little bit more time. He's done very, very well in the Championship. Of course, he's got teams out of the Championship. He's got teams into playoffs. He is a good, good manager. And I think it would make sense for Leicester to keep him on board. Um, what next for Scott Parker? I really am not sure, but I think what would be best for Scott Parker is to drop down maybe to a League One club and then learn his trade at lower level, learn from the mistakes, learn, maybe with a little bit less pressure. I'm not turning around and saying, no, Scott, if you're offered the Derby County job or the Reading job, go to one of those clubs because they there is going to be pressure there to get those clubs back into the championship. So that is not the right sort of club for Scott Parker. What he wants is a club, who he can build something with, learn his trades and build something he can then be proud of, and then be able to take that experience into, another championship or Premier League side. And that, is probably the best route for him as a manager long term, not taking another job which is high pressure. Let's be fair, if he gets Leeds or Leicester out of the championship into the Premier League and is bottom of the table in October, there's only one place where he's going again, and that's down the job centre, because both of those clubs are big clubs. They expect the very best and they expect to be competitive. And if either of those clubs aren't competitive, like, let's be fair, you know, we weren't, like Fulham weren't that season, there's only going to be one outcome. So, my personal advice is that I think, really he should learn his trade a little bit more. But let me know what you think. Um, put the comments all down below. Please hit the like, subscribe button, the bell button, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you for joining us.